Welcome everybody to Agentic SaaS Talks. I'm Michael Cooper from Omnistrate, and today's session is all about how to architect AI applications that truly think and scale. And so we're calling this one Agentic Architectures because building AI apps that think and scale, we're calling it AI apps that think and scale because we're truly seeing right now a new generation of intelligent systems emerge. And these aren't just prompt-driven tools. They're not just LLMs added to an existing software package. They're actually agentic applications that, to some level or degree, reason. They act or take actions on behalf of the user, and they adapt to the world around them. And that introduces a lot of really new, interesting and challenges, interesting, fun new challenges as it relates to taking these things to market. And so our goal today is to explore how to bring these new types of applications to market in a managed service sort of way, as well as some of the architectural decisions you're going to need to make as you do that in terms of what to build, what to buy, and how to scale intelligently from a prototype to production. And so on the panel today, I'm thrilled to welcome as our guest speaker today, John Lawrence. John is former head of the cloud architecture team at AWS SaaS Factory. He was a founder before that, and now he is actually transitioning back to the founder role. So he and his friends have built a new stealth startup that we're hoping to draw some information about from him because it sounds interesting, but you know those stealth startup guys are always kind of secretive about what they're doing. But what he has told us is they are solving some interesting data problems as it relates to AI challenges, and they're doing it mostly in the Middle East. And so that does introduce some really fun architectural choices as well, because in some of those regions, not all of the cloud services you kind of take for granted, they may not be there. And so, John, you want to say hello real quick?
Greetings. Thanks for the intro, Michael. So, as Michael said, former AWS, built a long time on AWS in the startup world, and now happy to be back in startup land, building on the new crop of services, not just the ones on AWS, but the services built on top of those cloud services. And as a early stage startup, that really changes the game for us, what we can do at this stage. So happy to go into that in a little more detail.
Excellent. And we also have Erman, longtime friend of the show, one of the original founders of the show, and was originally SaaS Monday, now Agentic SaaS Talks. Erman is also a former founder, currently with AWS, focusing mostly on helping startups build and scale intelligent systems throughout Europe. So Erman, want to say hi?
Hey, hi team. It's really nice to be here. So I'm looking forward to talk to John. We used to work in the same company for 4 years. I never met John before this show, but I know a lot of people from his team that he used to run, amazing experts, and looking forward actually being here today to learn from John.
And the one thing I'd also add is, while a lot of people who listen to our show may or may not have ever heard or met John, I promise you've read works or content or documentation that's come from his team, because his team for the last several years have been kind of true thought leaders in this space. And as a former Microsoft person, I remember stealing a lot of AWS documentation and thought leadership whenever we were building our stuff, because it was always really good stuff. So, and with that said, I also want to introduce Alok, the CTO and co-founder of Omnistrate, also longtime person in the startup world. In fact, you argue one of his first startups was his early days at AWS. But Alok, you want to say hi?
Hey, thanks, Michael. Nice to meet you all. And yeah, absolutely. I echo what Erman was saying. I think I'm super excited to see what John's up to. We've been obviously we've been involved with the AWS SaaS Factory team as well, and we've seen a lot of the cool stuff that they've built over time. So to see this from a founder perspective and to see actually John back into that role is super exciting.
Thanks.
Excellent. And so we're going to break today's conversation up into three parts. The first is kind of how to design your agentic architecture, and we're going to lean heavily on John's experience having done this in the past, then helped hundreds of companies through AWS do this, and now he's out doing it on his own. There's some changes in the world, if you guys noticed, but and how is he approaching this as a CTO of a new startup? What are the choices he's making? And so we're going to start there with the agentic architecture. Then we're talk a little bit about operationalize it, and then we're going to finalize on hey, in the world of agentic AI, does the parts of the stack you build versus the parts of the stack you buy, does that lens shift? We suspect it does, but we're kind of curious in terms of what are the deciding factors. And so we are at an inflection point in this industry today. What we thought was, we all thought we understood AI apps 6 months ago. It's an LLM attached to your existing software doing cool things. And it turns out we were wrong. This industry, it is moving far faster than we thought. AI apps are no longer hip or cool. We're now into agentic, and agentic means that your app is now, at times self-programming, and it's times adapting, and absolutely at times taking actions on your behalf. And so, John, I think we all kind of want to get into that. Hey, what are you doing, and kind of what are you learning? And so, as a CTO of a new startup coming out there, and focusing on the harder side of it, putting a new app or designing a new app into a region where all of the cloud services might not be readily available. What are the first choices you're making? Talk to us through what you're doing and the early decisions that you're making.
Absolutely. So to set a little context, so I'm a co-founder at a company called Pixos AI, and we make a software solution for really operationalizing data compliance for data privacy laws, right? So this is different than, say, SOC 2 compliance, which is a little more cybersecurity oriented. We're in the Saudi region and the GCC to help companies there comply with the PDPL law that has emerged in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is modeled after GDPR, but even harder to comply to. So now that we're starting at this point in time versus starting a few years ago, we get to rethink how we actually address this, right? And so you could take a traditional approach, which is very human workflow oriented, right? And anybody who's been a data privacy officer or been involved in compliance, there's a lot of auditing, there's a lot of discovery, it's just a lot of digital paperwork, for lack of a better frame up, right? So this is where agents come in. And so agents can really do a lot of that work for you, right? And so kind of what's the difference between, say, SaaS and an agentic platform? Well, like the best frame up of that I've heard recently is AI agentic workflows is self-driving SaaS, right? Because we're still building software offerings that deliver value over the wire, right? That's the core of SaaS. You still have all the same business concerns. You still have multiple tenants, but the experience of the value prop shifts dramatically, right? That also points to, where do you put your engineering time and resources, right? So as an early stage startup, you only have so much time, talent, and cash. So that's what we're always conserving as startups. What do we do, right? And I'd say, traditionally in the past, we'd have a lot of focus on UX and creating the human experience. But what we found at Pixos is we've really dialed down that part of our stack and dialed up the agentic experience, which leads us to the new problem of so how do we have the humans be operators and not the drivers, and how do we represent that? So those are some new kind of interface problems, right? Because in this age of agentic AI, conversational interface is now just kind of table stakes. It's kind of given you have some element of that. That's not even agents. Agents are in the background informing the conversation. The agents are in the background doing the work. So it's also a different skill set for an early stage company to hire for, right? Am I hiring a lot of software engineers, or am I hiring a lot of context engineers? Maybe subject matter experts that actually can shape and focus the results of the AI and the agents. And that's what we've found as a dramatic shift in our thinking at Pixos. I'd say over the late summer and early fall here is what's the type of talent we need to bring in to shape those agent outcomes, regardless of where those agents run on.
Now, I do think that's an interesting tee up, and it wasn't part of our original, but I do think it is something we should dive into real quick, is in terms of, who are you hiring first, and is there a difference in who you're hiring for in terms of skill set? And so, actually, wouldn't mind bringing a look into that part here. So, look, you have a unique situation in which you started Omnistrate right before the AI rush, and the AI rush got here. It was mostly LLM driven. Then there was this, vibe coding, and it was cute. And now there's vibe coding, and it's pretty good. And so, has that changed who you're hiring or what you're hiring for, or is it just a good engineer is good at engineer, and AI just makes them better?
To be fair, I think it's a bit of both. I would definitely say it's more on the latter side, because it enables folks to operate at a much higher, capacity, if you will, right? And so what we are starting to see, at least, is a lot of the what we call quote unquote grunt work is essentially what AI can automate for us. But where it actually still is, at least at the moment, where it actually still relies on folks and engineers is in how to actually get it. And to John's point, you still need an operator that actually uses it, because it's still at the end of the day a tool, right? It's not necessarily something that's coming in as a replacement or whatever the industry wants to essentially tout it as. I think where it significantly has helped us is especially in some of the as a startup, you're always resource constrained. So the things that we potentially put on the back burner, right? So which historically has been tech debt. It helps us burn down that tech debt, not build that tech debt. And so there's a lot of aspects of work that you do day to day that you can actually offload to this. So I would say it's more of that's influenced us and who we hire and how they can use these tools, versus essentially saying, hey, we completely changed the persona who we hire. So yeah, I would say it's more on the latter.
Yeah.
So that means, go ahead, John. Sorry.
Just to briefly riff on that, Alec, is one of the things that we see is if you've been in software engineering a long time, you actually have you think you actually need to do some software engineering when you might not have to anymore, right? Like maybe that capability comes to life better as an agent or an agent workflow, which is a very different approach than writing more code necessarily.
Absolutely. No, I think you're 100% right. I think where there is also, a thought process that we are still going through is what parts of this is essentially better off as what we call as dynamic workflows, right? Which is essentially agents, versus like what still needs to be built as a static workflow, which is potentially the old way of doing APIs and SaaS, if you will, right? And so when we say static, what we particularly mean is there are cases involved, especially given that we deal with the infrastructure side of things. Agents as they are today still need a lot more guardrails. We still need to make sure that there's trust that needs to be built into that, right? And so there are still aspects of the platform that we need to make sure that you write it the way that enforces or ensures reliability, right? And so you're 100% right that there are certain parts of it that no longer need to be done that way. Especially when it comes to things like analytics or some of the day two operations that customers perform today, right? Those are passive operations. Those tend to be something that you can offload to agents. And they also tend to fit better if especially the problem is a bit more unstructured, right? If the problem is structured, then it's still better off to actually have a more static workflow. At least that's what we've seen in our experience, particularly given that we're dealing with customers with a lot of sensitive data and stuff like that.
Yep.
Maybe if I could just add on what we discussed, or bring back the discussion to the hiring, because I see that as a solutions architect, I work with a lot of startups, and hiring as a topic comes over and over again. Right? And when this AI topic started, and we started seeing the first code assistant, initially we thought, okay, this could actually, make developers faster. Then, coding platforms, vibe coding platforms like Lovable or Origin AI, they came on, and then I thought, oh my God, this will actually replace us software engineers, right? You don't need software engineers. And then I realized that vibe coding platform helps you actually code your MVP, but you still need good engineers. So you still need those productivity tools you still need to hire those engineers. And now what I actually noticed with tools like Kiro, and I'm coming from Amazon. Kiro is actually Amazon tool, but this is not actually promoting Kiro. Kiro has a feature which is actually spec-driven development, right? Which means that LLMs are actually very, very good in writing specification documents, requirements document, design documents, even task list, your backlog items. So this is actually what Kiro does. And now I'm thinking, oh my God, we're not going to replace software engineers. We're gonna replace all those product and project managers that we had in the loop. I used to be one of those people, right? So who would actually go to business, understand requirements, and come back and translate it in a technical language. Now I see that LLM actually can do that way better, but I would still need to invest into my software engineers and they will need to use coding tools, but I don't see how I can actually deliver something yet without investing in my engineering team. So, John, Alok, Michael as well, right? So, what do you see on the market? Do you see that shift that we need different profile of people, or good engineers are good engineers?
So I'll take that one. So I have the opposite perspective, is that
Cool.
the AI actually shifts the abilities left towards the product leaders, so that we need less developers. And I think the important thing to think about AI is it's not that we don't need anybody, we just need less of each kind of role, because each role gets the superpower, right? And so what product leaders get out of this is they can deliver a better spec, right? And what the engineering leaders get out of this is they can take a better spec and hopefully hit the target, the first time and quickly, right? And so it takes out a lot of folks in the middle. So one of the things we're looking at Pixos here is to say, like, maybe the roles we hire for aren't traditional product managers, but really a product owner that comes with a set of responsibilities and breadth of how they bring that product ownership to life, different than a product owner than what we had in 2015, when we were doing like very rigorous agile. The product owner had a certain responsibilities. Now that product owner shifted, right, in terms of what they do. That's kind of how we think about it.
And if I can double click on that one real quick, because as one of the old fogies in the tech rooms that I walk into these days, we've seen this game before. And so, back when we were building data centers, we used to have a networking team, then we had a storage team, then we had the physical team, and then we had the server team, then we had the OS team. And as abstraction layers grew, we saw that change, and we saw the networking, Cisco versus Microsoft, and one of them is going to eat each other, and it turns out the cloud ate both of them. And so we've seen this happen before. And so going back to John's statement of, are we hiring more developers, or are we hiring more PMs? I do think those roles start to merge, and I do think it's going to be a little bit of Darwinism there. And so a really good PM with great dev skills probably wins this game. But I don't think AI can turn a developer who doesn't understand PM into an architect. And I do think those special birds who can do a little bit of both, AI gives them the superpower to allow them to do both.
Yeah,
100%.
Kind of also echo that, but at the same time, I feel like it's definitely a transitory phase that we are in, right? So I think from a vision perspective and where the industry is headed, you're right, that it's shrinking, right? It's definitely, the roles are shrinking. I think at the moment, though, the way it seems to be is, at least based on what our conversations with customers have been, we are definitely seeing that they're hiring or leaning more and more towards the senior engineers and the folks who are actually a little bit higher level up in terms of technicality, right? I think where there is a significant impact, at least we've personally seen, is more of the junior roles are being cannibalized by AI. I think that's a reality. I think that's not necessarily something that is hidden anymore. Where it is still, as I said, it's just an artifact of where we are with the tech. It's definitely that folks are definitely going for the senior engineers, the platform engineers who are a little bit more in terms of like, look, I actually can design the system in my head, and then I just need a bunch of agents to help me implement it. I think that's where we are seeing customers at least default to at the moment.
So if we can dive into that a little bit and back onto the architectural track, I do think the hiring is incredibly important, especially for the early stage folks. But one of the questions that we were saying is, what's involved in an MVP, and I think that's been discussed. But I think one thing that's truly unique in the age of AI and the move to agentic, and I'm gonna start with you, Alok, because you just built one, and then I'll transition it over to John, which is, hey, when we were the first thing you do after building your MVP is to start adding APIs to it. And now we're saying, well, wait a second, well, before it was you had a bunch of humans who'd answer the call, and then you'd move to APIs who would do it. And now we're saying, hey, maybe APIs are a thing of the past and we're moving to MCP. Talk through your thinking about why Omnistrate made its choices in terms of putting out an MCP, as well as where are we going there, and then I definitely want John to come in there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think our primary motivation, actually, I mean, if you think about the customer onboarding cycle that we have today, right? Customers, we target users and buyers who have some sort of an architecture that they've already had in mind, and they're at a point where they need to start scaling, right? So scaling in terms of like whether it's actually try to serve to enterprises or serve to millions of users or thousands of users, even in some cases, right? So it's basically coming from a position of unstructured. As I said, it's an unstructured problem because architectures are different. People have made different choices. People have chosen different tools to actually implement what the current setup is. And we're essentially taking and lifting and shifting that to our platform and then helping them scale from there. And so where agents start really shining is basically help us scale with this problem, which is not just make the customer onboarding work a little bit more seamlessly irrespective of where customers are starting from, but also start self-serving, right? So customers don't have to rely on someone from our side actually white gloving the whole process. So that's where, especially with at least leveraging something like an MCP server, right, is allowing us to embed ourselves into their existing development ecosystem. So whether that could be GitHub Copilot, that could be Cloud Code. And so what that allows them to do is, essentially integrate Omnistrate, work with Omnistrate, especially with the cloud skills that we've recently launched, allows them to essentially shape that structure into something that's what the platform needs, work on an iteration loop and trying to make sure that this whole thing works correctly, and obviously testing and all of that goes into it, right? And then also do more of on the day two side of things once it's up and running, making it easier for them to actually access all of this information. And so that's at least what was the motivation for us to start introducing this and getting more embedded into the customer lifecycle.
Cool. Does that mean, Alok, that so in the past, what we would do, we would provide APIs, right? So APIs would actually be an integration window for your application into the external world environment,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Now, what you did, you said, okay, we still have APIs, but we're adding on top MCPs so that LLMs and agents actually from our customers can actually use our MCP servers in order to complete the work, right? So you're actually, instead of opening, you're not just opening your software to other humans to use APIs or programs to use APIs. You're opening it to AI agents to use your MCPs, right?
That's exactly right. I think that's to my point earlier, which is if there's a static workflow, you're 100% right. I could just provide an API in front of it. It's just a matter of input, output, and that the customer's done, right? And because this is more of like you need to chain together a bunch of tools, or you need to chain together tools that might not necessarily be in a specific order, which is basically the dynamic workflow, right? That's the context that the agent has, which is to say that, look, I actually, for example, in terms of what customers we onboard today, some of them come with a simple Docker image and say, hey, look, I just want you to take this and help me deploy this across clouds, right? Very simple. But there are certain customers who come to us and say, hey, I actually have a much more complicated setup. I've embraced Kubernetes as an ecosystem. I've already embraced Helm charts. There's a bunch of tooling that I've already built. I just want you to help me replicate this in my customer's account. A completely different use case, but it's still something that our control plane solves, right? And so both of these are essentially, if you will think of it, it's an API, right? But then how do you actually massage it and then make it work, according to the platform rules or platform specifications is where the unstructured problem comes. And that's where agents are really good at understanding, okay, this is what I have, this is what I need to go to, and this is the tools I'll actually leverage, and in this order. So that becomes a little bit more dynamic. And that helps us scale, because at that point, the problems boil down to, if you think of like an 80-20 rule, 80% of the use cases are solved itself. So 20% have a little bit more complexity that we can actually get in. But even when we get into that problem of solving those 20% use cases, it's much later on in the phases, which is, something that requires more customization or something that's a little bit more unique that we don't have, ready recipes to.
Yeah. I mean, maybe back to John, right? So thanks, Michael, right? Because I don't want to kind of destroy the show, but this probably deserves a dedicated show on, limitations and issues that you're facing when building MCP interface, right?
Yep.
Well, I would say there was a little bit of there was a lot of tongue-in-cheek statements out there a while ago saying SaaS is dead. I've not heard anyone say API is dead, but is that now a valid statement? So I mean, so if the point to Agentic is the software is going to be interacting with each other in different ways, John, as you're starting to design your software, what are you thinking? So I mean, when an agent's talking to agents, I mean, where are you going, especially as it relates to data and data sovereignty?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about MCP servers, right, it's APIs that speak English and listen, and listen to English, right, which makes them less rigid to implement by others, right? And so if you're creating an application that is integral to other processes, marketing processes, for example, in our world and around data privacy, right now those marketing processes are executed mostly by humans. But when they're executed by agents, the speed will go way, way off the charts. So the dependent decision support systems, such as like, hey, is this what I'm doing compliant? Also have to speed up, right? And have to operate at that speed. So we're taking an MCP server first approach in terms of our foundations, that provides conversational interface, and to the humans, and also provides conversational interface to other future systems. And so I think probably one of the biggest barriers we have is we feel we're a little bit ahead of where the market's at, where the users are at yet, right? Because the users haven't realized, like, well, if it's not me asking, like, what, oh wait, yeah, there's some existential challenges people have, right? But if you walk around San Francisco, right, you see ads for Agent Force everywhere, right? Like, or your automated SDRs. Well, those agents want to move as fast as they can, and they got to work with other agents. So we're not quite in that world yet, but that world, I think, is really right around the corner. So when we're thinking, things, data compliance, the first thing we think about is, one of the challenges is accountability. Like, if something bad happens, whose neck do we wring, right? So in our world, we actually don't want to we don't want to eliminate the human in the loop, but we want to reduce the human in the loop. And where the human in the loop is a rinse and repeat process, we want to actually speed the folks in the organization along and unburden the data privacy officer, for example. So, one of the challenges in our market is all of a sudden there's a new law and every company has to comply to the law, but there's this many experts in the world, right? So creating an agentic centered data compliance privacy platform really can actually give those experts outsize leverage and impact in the world. And that's actually what we've done. So is we actually use human experts to create the digital experts that then get interfaced to through the MCP service. And it's a different way to think about your product. Like, where's the value prop coming out of your product, right? You can see this in like Linear App, right, which is the software project management tool that's kind of displaced for the next generation of builders classic plays like Jira, right? And there's nothing wrong with Jira, but they took an agentic first approach, like, and I'm using it that way, right? As I use it with ChatGPT and I feed it specs, and then I feed that to Cursor, right? And you start to get a very much an automated flow. And then something like Linear becomes less about a tool for project managers, but more of my instrumentation of the factory that's going on here. And so again, that's a different way to think about the value of a tool like that in an MCP kind of way. If that makes sense.
It really does. And I do have a follow-up there, because one of the other things that I do want to kind of transition to, or ensure that we're touching, especially as it relates to architecting your decision, is front end versus back end. And so it's kind of easy for us to kind of imagine the LLMs changing how front ends behave. But as an old school infrastructure guy, it's also terrifying for me to start thinking about an MCP or AI dynamically changing how the backend behaves. And so, as it relates to data, backend scares me. And so I do want to kind of break those two up and follow up with you guys on that. So John, let's start with front end, kind of go to back end, because I do know, as you're building this out, you're making some front end choices. Can you talk us through what are the choices you're making as it relates to building out your front end design? How much, your big support, you were a huge supporter of Vercel and those types of solutions when you were at AWS. As you're a founder, is that still part of your front end thinking? Are you going native AWS services? What do you think?
Yes, and all of the above. So let me walk backwards from how I think. So this is a little plug for for AWS partner organization. But as a founder, before I was at AWS, I was really unaware of the partner organization. But having worked in the partner organization for 4.5 years, I really understood the value of being able to go to market with a big cloud vendor like AWS, right? So I've started my journey with Pixos not thinking as much of how do I make a scalable product, but how do I make a saleable product, right? And actually literally architectural choices working backwards from, okay, if I choose the right body parts, I probably can I can leverage go to market with AWS or you do this with most of the cloud vendors. But so I've actually assembled a set of AWS partners, including Vercel, right, to build on in NeonDB that allows me to move very fast, but under the hood, it's all AWS, right? And so, so everyone plug for hey, this is a missed opportunity to AWS to actually be recombinant of these bigger order services that are built in AWS to mint even newer partners, right? And so that's how I'm approaching this is I'm using the biggest building blocks that I don't have to manage services on AWS specifically so that I actually, when it comes time to go to market with AWS, I can check all the boxes and say, yes, built in AWS, even though strangely AWS actually won't see me because I'm Vercel's customer and I'm NeonDB's customer and so on and so forth. Omnistrate is really interesting in my picture is I've created a kind of compute app data plane that's an enclave for the customer. When we were at SaaS Factory, we often came at the problem from the inside out. Okay, you're using serverless, KAs, what is versus I'm coming at it from the customer side in to say, hey, not all data is created equal. You want a fully managed platform for data compliance. We got that, but you also want your private data siloed, right? So with technologies like NeonDB, I can programmatically have agents spin up siloed enclaves, for example. I'm just using that as a part of the enclave instantly, and because it scales to zero at very little cost in a way that a fully siloed infrastructure for the scale I'm looking at would be very expensive, right? So now where a company like Omnistrate comes in is when they go, well, we want that enclave, we want to manage that inside of our GCP account or AWS account or whatever. That's where that sort of Uber control plane service that the Omnistrate represents really fits in for us, right? We'll still probably front end deploy Next.js and Vercel, but as some of the back end parts need to go inside customer accounts, we don't want to deal with that. I'd much rather outsource all DevOps to other people like Vercel, like Omnistrate.
So quick follow up there for you, Alok. Is that a pattern you see? So is John doing something truly unique, or is that pretty common where people are starting with a front end on a well-defined system and then turning to tools like Omnistrate when they need to do back end? Or what are we doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was actually going to add a couple of things. I completely agree with what John's saying. This is the pattern we see, especially with folks who are building anything that has to do with AI, right? And primarily because if you think about AI, as I said, it's tackling unstructured problems, and unstructured problems comes from mostly data that's sitting somewhere, right? And the problem with data that's sitting somewhere, especially for enterprises, is they don't want the data to go to the compute. They want the compute to come to the data, right? So which means at the end of the day, if you think of AI agents, they're compute at the end of the day, which is nothing but just your dynamic apps that you've written. And so 100% what John's saying is true, which is we are starting to see more and more customers prefer that as their default route, where they actually want this entire stack, especially on the backend, to be deployed on the customer's account. And we've even had cases where a customer's been 100% on this, and they have no offering that says, I host any of your infrastructure, primarily because it's only a POC. It's nothing more than that. It never actually lives longer than that. And so we're starting to see that one. The second thing I would also add on to this is backend itself, in some interesting ways, is getting split into two parts, if you will. Right, one is the whole data platform. So what that means is, things like your traditional databases, your traditional data analytics stores, operational analytics, all of that, right? So that's basically the storage layer. And this is a conversation I was having earlier with one of the Google execs this week. And so what they're also starting to see is the layer on top of it, which is the whole app, right? With John, as to John's point, it's becoming more dynamic. So it thinks like, this is not even an app that lives anymore. It could just get spun up. It's something that just gets run just for that particular customer's query, and then the app is gone. You just throw away the whole app, and then the LLM just creates, or the agent creates a completely different app for a different query. And so what's fixed, though, is still the data layer and the way you access the data, all of that. And that's key to the privacy and compliance and everything that's necessary for regulatory enforcement, right? And so that is where we are starting to see more and more go towards the actual customer's deployment.
Interesting. It actually goes in a direction of what Sam Altman said a couple of months ago about, disposable SaaS, something like a fast fashion era of SaaS, that we will very quickly spin new SaaS application that will be seasonal, right? I need it for this particular season or this particular job, and I will run my application. And then after that, when I don't need it, I'll just simply kill it, right? What I didn't, and I just realized that, when John and Alok were talking, is how data is still relevant and important, right? Even if you use it seasonal, you still need to preserve your data. You need to still be compliant. You need to still refer to it maybe, next season or with your new SaaS and things like that. So you could actually build your application, potentially even your backend, seasonally, and when you need it, but data suddenly gets new significance that it didn't have before. I'm not sure how you see that.
Yeah, so if you think about traditional SaaS, right, it's defined workflows against the data sets, right? And those workflows are for the human operators who had an idea at a certain point in time, right? But if you think about the use cases as being disposable, right? Maybe they last a season, maybe they last 5 years, who knows? But with agents, right, you all of a sudden get almost like a functional compute layer on top of your data, right? It sort of flips it to say like, oh, I have a new idea to do with this data. And the user, as much as possible, we shift the agency down to the end user to be able to render their idea using agents, right? And this is where I find that a lot of these sort of agent management platforms really fascinating, right? So takes something like N8N. It's an authoring tool for agents, right? Your typical software engineer might cringe at like, oh gosh, it's like not efficient, but guess what? It enables less technical people to make magic things happen, right? And to me, it's for those kind of authoring platforms that we haven't even invented what they're going to be, but they actually allow us to have this kind of disposability of use cases on data.
Yeah, I would actually quickly add a little bit onto that too. I agree with you. I think in some ways, the traditional IDE, the traditional programming language is all changing, especially when it comes to build this new age of apps, right? A lot of it, to your point, especially non-technical folks, they don't want to deal with it because that's not necessarily their core anyway, right? And so the abstractions shifting, to Michael's point, the abstractions going higher and higher. So which means, things are a little bit more low code, no code is going to start being, at least start to look up more appealing. And then but at the end of the day, at the heart of it all, you still need all of the guarantees and everything that previous generation of SaaS apps were giving you in terms of reliability, privacy, all of that, right? And so, yeah, 100%, I agree with you.
And the technical shift that makes, I think, the agent landscape interesting, right, is we go from from needing high performance, always on servers to handle high transaction volumes to we actually need scale to zero ephemeral compute more and more because again, an agent might get instantiated, does its job, and it goes away, right? And that doesn't represent one microservice in a pod because you might have thousands of agents and you certainly don't want like that many microservices you got to keep track of all the time, always on, right?
Yep.
And I think we keep saying it, and I do think I think at some point we should actually say it officially out loud. We're all at the end of the day, data folks at heart. I mean, I'm an old storage guy, and we used to be hosting your databases. At some point, the databases ate the storage teams, and so now we're just saying, hey, it's structured versus unstructured data, and how are you structuring the data, and how are you doing that? Searches or lookup against the data. That changes which database you're talking about, but we just kind of all treat this as this thing of data. But at no point is AI making data less relevant. I think AI is making data more relevant. And the moats people will put up, or any intelligent company has already figured out that their data is the most valuable thing they own. And that is the uniqueness that they have. And if other people are able to train against their data, a lot of their secrets are out. And so what OpenAI and those guys did is they scraped the entire internet and built LLMs, and that was amazing. And that was, in theory, like that should have been life changing, and that should have been it. But it turns out once one person did it, other people figured out how to do it, and now LLMs are not that unique or that interesting. And so we're moving up the stack. And what is unique and interesting is the data inside those companies. And any intelligent company is going to put up a huge moat and a huge ring and huge guardrails that say, this doesn't leave us, and no one's training against this because this is special to us. And so if I can go back to, John, this is kind of core of what your startup's kind of doing is having, telling that data story and providing end users access to the data, but also ensuring that the government and the companies and the laws and regulations are followed in terms of how the data is used. And so how do you balance that?
Well, not only do you how do you balance that, but if you take a step back up from this of a true agentic economy, right? You have to ask the question, where does the application live? Does it live with software company A or B or C, or is it the combination of agents and the data behind those agents that is actually the solution now, right? And then that makes the compliance question even stickier, right? Like who's responsible, whose fault, whatever, right? So that's a puzzle we haven't quite tackled yet, is again, in a world where we're deriving value from a collective action of agents that can work together from different entities or organizations. Like, what does that look like? How do you monetize that? Like, to me, that's an interesting problem too, is monetizing the truly almost self-organizing application, right? And then again, the challenge with data compliance is how does data get safely shared or not in a near real-time way? And this is kind of a bit of the secret sauce of what Pixis is working on right now, because that is a very different speed of operations than we're typically used to. But I want to go back to the idea of where does the application live, right? Because now we're not talking about applications that live in one company's AWS account in a VPC or collection of VPCs. It's a combination of interests, and SaaS is always a combination of interests, right? Like you use Datadog or something for your observability platform and another vendor for your database. Software is always a bunch of OEM parts, but now the OEM parts are planetary scale, right? They're planetary wide. Like, because I'm using NeonDB, I can actually deploy to every region I want to, like instantaneously, because I'm using Vercel. I can do that. Great. I don't need myself in my old role, as a solutions architect, right? It just happens. And now I have a planetary scale application, and which I think we haven't even seen yet what that kind of self-driving SaaS really looks like, right? But we're going to have to come up with agreements between vendors that are sort of kind of digital ad hoc agreements in terms of data exchange, and we're going to have to track all that.
And we're going to have to trust somebody in the process, which is probably the harder part.
The question is who?
There is also another interesting trend that is happening, right? And this is actually because for traditional SaaS companies, we're noticing something like we call it the great decoupling, right? But it's basically decomposition of the functions to make it smaller so that agent can actually utilize those functions. So it's not only data, it's also backend. So we go in a direction of build decoupling our SaaS and potentially not offering SaaS solution, but offering all the agents. And now, if you remember, even before SaaS, we used to have managed service providers, and managed service provider would have, software version 1.1 deployed with customer A and software 2.2 deployed by customer 2. I used to work for one of those companies. We were developing banking software, and each of our banks customers had a different software version, a little bit tweaked, right? So it's not sustainable. And then SaaS came, where actually SaaS was forcing you have your control plane, and every single customer uses exactly the same version of your software. You can switch on, switch off features. But now what's actually happening with John, you mentioned you will have that agentic world where you could actually have different agents from different providers, put them together, and then have potentially your control plane, but have something like N8N, right, or orchestrator to put those agents to work together. And now we're suddenly moving from every of my customer has the same version of the software to every customer that I have can actually select agents that they need and compose that into a SaaS, or not SaaS, compose it into a software, into a solution that they need. So we almost made a circle now from different version for different providers to unifying that into SaaS, and then from SaaS now everyone can go to single solution or personalized solution.
Yep.
So we are at the top of the hour, and these hours always go way too fast. And I learned so much listening to you guys. And so I do want to kind of end with my standard question, because it's fun. We ask it every other week, and every other week the answers are completely different. And so, John, who's a little new to the show, I'll warn you ahead of time. The question is, what did you learn? What new tool or what new? Originally it was what new prompt trick did you learn today? But now that we're into agents, I mean, it's kind of funny. 5 months ago, it was all about your prompting skills, and it's crazy that that's no longer a topic. And so, what new AI feature or tool did you kind of learn or experience this week that you think other people should notice as well? And so, Erwin, you're kind of the old hat to the show. I'm gonna put you on the spot first. So, what's the new trick you learned this week?
So it's not so much trick, right? It's a tool that I'm using it for a longer time, and the more I use it, actually, the more excited I am about it. And this is actually not sponsored show, so I'll just mention. So what I use also is actually Descript. So Descript is actually podcasting tool. It helps me create those short videos that I can publish on YouTube or LinkedIn. And it's really amazing because it actually record and transcript our show, for example, here. And then I simply say, find me exciting discussion in the show around, this particular topic. And then it delivers 30 second snippets that I can simply take as it is and publish it online. So it's amazing, and it's using AI agents. And even if I want to edit something, I actually ask AI agent within the tool saying, well, I would need to shorten that video and replace the end with something else, and it goes crazy and does that. So it's, as I said, I'm not actually promoting the tool itself, but I really like how that AI and agentic workflow helped me edit faster videos, and also on this podcast, but also on the other podcasts that I'm running.
Love it. John?
I'd say it's less about a new tool and more about refining methodology, right? And I'm gonna call it the old tool, ChatGPT. I use it every day, all day, as one of my former team members said, as my thinking buddy, and I've learned to use it in a in a different way where essentially I have a I always say it trains me as much as I train it, right? And where it's trained me to is being able to kind of like take a collection of questions, like I have a big problem, break it down, and like literally just make a project in ChatGPT and pile all those questions in together atomically, and then I actually end up with a whole recipe in an hour versus I would say my methodology a couple weeks ago felt a lot more like I was stumbling around, right? And so to me, I haven't found yet. Like we use a bunch of tools behind the scenes to make the Pixis magic work, but in my day-to-day work, I've gotten even deeper with ChatGPT, and I take those recipes and then I feed them into to various bits into Cursor, right? And together it works out really well.
Love it. Alok?
Yes, I would actually say a couple of things. One is one that I learned from one of the members on our team. So we've actually actively started using Gemini now, and then there's essentially gems within Gemini, which is pretty cool. And so to John's point, actually, that's exactly what Gemini is trying to automate, which is the recipe that you build. You kind of build it as a template, then you share the gem with the rest of the team, and so it becomes easier. Let's say, for example, you're writing a case study. It's a case study that just writes. It's a gem case study, right? And so that was one interesting discovery this week. The second one is more of like what we launched with Claude, which is the Claude Skills, but the concept or the feature of Claude Skill itself is, I think, definitely pretty powerful. And to some degree, it's an extension of the custom agents instructions that people were writing in agents.md or any of the markdown files there, right? But Claude Skills definitely seems promising, especially with the way you can pack a lot of context, but then not overwhelm the context actually in memory, right, for Claude. And so that's something that we found pretty powerful.
Love it. So I'll round it out with a statement that everyone here is going to look at me and this is nuts. And my statement is CLI is back. So the command line interface is everything. And I know that sounds nuts because everyone on this call says it never left. That's all we live in. But there's a lot of us who did. So a lot of us kind of left the command line. We went to GUI. We became marketing people or salespeople or all the rest of it. But in reality, it turns out that a lot of these tools, at least today, when you're using ChatGPT or Claude or the rest of it, when you're using the agent on your desktop, it's really good for coming up with ideas, and then you're copying and pasting in places. But when you're doing things in CLI, you can actually build files and do things for you. And so the power of the command line interface tied with an LLM is pretty impressive. And if you haven't been playing with it for things other than development, you should. And the other thing I'd say is if you're not switching between kind of the four big players in the CLI, you should as well, because they all behave differently, they talk differently, they answer differently, and they're going to give you different ideas of what Agentic can do. And so Gemini is amazing, but the way Google has built it and the way it handles memory is different, very different than the way Anthropic has done their stuff or how OpenAI has done their stuff. And so one, if you're not in CLI, you got to go back. Two, if you are in CLI, start doing things other than development in the CLI because it's amazing what that tool can do. And three, you got to play with all the bigger tools right now because they're all very different. So thank you again, John, Alok, Erwin. Amazing session as always. I always learn by listening to you guys. And we'll see the audience again in 2 weeks. Please like or subscribe. We're on YouTube and LinkedIn. Appreciate everyone listening in.
Thanks, Michael, for coordinating.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks all.
Talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Yep. Bye.